Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Cheryl van Daalen-Smith, and I'm the Associate Dean Academic with the Faculty of Grad Studies. Welcome to our next iteration of Scholarly Skills. It's a brown bag gathering where we're wanting to reach out and wrap around graduate students with skills we know you want to develop in, and we have the expertise to provide that for you. I'll be joined very shortly by Alison Maracas-Collins, the Director of the Office of Research Ethics, who will be providing sort of the nuts and bolts of research ethics and things we want to be thinking about. So today's conversation is going to be about helping you navigate the ethics journey, getting approval, and balancing the serious aspects of ethics with the opportunities that are there for you. Now, we in FGS really understand that this can be a scary milestone. For sure, it's full of aspects that are serious that we have to think about and wonder about, and we may not really understand just yet. But more than anything, it's full of awesome opportunities. And today, we really want to help you see the process and that you take away this one message, that you can do this. So our agenda is to talk about the delegated research ethics review process that is happening for grad students, help you understand how this is a milestone for you, and help you understand how the proposal and research ethics go hand in hand. Talk a little bit about the serious things to take into account and the cool opportunities, and then the sort of research ethics 101 from the most knowledgeable person in the university, that's the Director of Research Ethics. And then we'll tell you some of the careful considerations with those forms and why this milestone is good for you. So research ethics and proposal development, it really is worth it. I know I sound like a supervisor right now, but the learning that's attached to this milestone are so important, we actually call it a milestone. It's sort of a juncture in your journey in grad studies. And once you're past it, you can look back and say, it was worth it. I understand a lot more now, and I feel more secure about the study that I want to do. So what exactly is a milestone in grad studies? Well, it's a substantial juncture of your demonstrated capacity. It's your learning. So some examples, you already did one, and that's the statement of intent that you wrote to get in. Another one is the proposal development, ethics approval, then your comprehensive exam, and trust me, it looks really different for different disciplines out there. And then your actual research or your inquiry or your creative endeavor, that's the main component of your degree. And then there's the development of your thesis and dissertation, and then there's that big oral defense and party. And at each step of a milestone should be guidance to get there, assistance to achieve it, and then celebration once you achieve it. So proposal development goes hand in hand with research ethics. And let's underline the word proposal. This means that it's something that's done and approved before you commence your area of inquiry. As a grad student, you work on your proposal with your supervisor closely, and you get input and direction from that supervisor and all members of your committee. You should also have a look-see if your own program has criterion for a proposal. The development of a proposal then gives way to your ethics application, and it should be done before. It is the discussion of who, what, where, when, why, and how that goes into your proposal that you'll figure everything out, and you'll know then what goes in each box of the research ethics. If you try to do it opposite, or you try to do the research ethics without going after those 5 W's and the how, it's going to be confusing and difficult and sort of render many, many versions. So we don't want to do it in that way. So those words of who, what, where, when, why, how, what they do is if you're able to answer these questions, and I should say when you're able to answer those questions, this is exactly what you need to develop your proposal. So who or what do you want to study? Why? How? What are the questions you want to ask? What are the aims? What's the best method to get at these questions that you have? Who do you want to involve? Once those are answered and your committee says, yep, that's good, that's a broad enough scope, the method matches, this is all going to work, then you look at your research ethics application. So what is the area of study or a gap or a problem or a situation you want to learn more about? What do you need to learn from, or sorry, who do you need to learn from, or who do you need to involve in the study, and why? This is the rationale. What are the questions you want to ask in order to learn what it is you want to learn? What is the aim or the core goal of this inquiry? What are your research questions? What questions would you ask participants if relevant? How will you engage them? Who will you involve? How will you protect them and the data? And what research methodology do you and your committee agree is best to use for this inquiry? So landing on those answers, that's how you build your proposal, and that's what goes into the ethics application. So what are we talking about today? The milestone is the proposal plus your ethics forms, which are the TD1 and TD2, which Allison's going to talk about shortly. So I said it takes a balance between the seriousness and the opportunities. So the seriousness in ethics are thinking about risk assessment. Are you planning to go on top of a volcano that's about to burst? I think York wants to know, and your supervisor might want to know. You might want to mitigate those risks. All joking aside, we want to be thinking about making sure that you're safe in this research. Also, we want to make sure that you're protecting your participants, their rights to anonymity and confidentiality and safety. So thinking about what you want to ask them is important. Getting approval for how you want to engage participants is really important. Always get approval before field work. If you're in the field and things change, you must get permission to change it through your supervisor and through the Office of Research Ethics. And then there's confidentiality requirements and protecting data. That's some of the seriousness. But these opportunities, wow, it's time you get to refine your envisioned inquiry under the guidance of your supervisor and committee. It's time to be wrapped around by the supervisor to help you sort things out. You're going to get guidance on method, scope, and aims. And then by the end of it, you know exactly those 5 W's and the how. And your research questions will be tethered to the aim of your work and the method. So it's sort of all congruent. I just want to go here. So we have a delegated research ethics process, and it involves a few steps. So what I want to do is just for the interest of time, show you this slide. It's more interesting than the first one. So in a delegated ethics review, what we're doing is that your supervisor and your committee has a look at everything. Then it comes to FGS and we have a look at everything. We give feedback, it goes in a memo, it goes up to the Office of Research Ethics. And then feedback goes back to you on what either approval or some tweaking needs to happen. It's faster that way in this delegated process than normally it would go to the full university committee, and that could take 2 to 3 times the amount of time that a delegated ethics review occurs. So who does what? What's your role? So the student, that's you, conceives the inquiry project, you propose its scope and methods, you meet with your supervisor to revise and finalize that proposal, and then complete the TD1 and TD2. And you notice how many times I've said with supervisor. I just don't want you to be alone. The supervisor's role is to assist you and help you and eventually sign off. The GPD takes another look-see, making sure that it matches the programmatic requirements for proposals and ethics. Just make sure they are aware of what you're wanting to do. And of course, the graduate program administrators, well, they make sure everything's tickety-boo, signed off, everybody is looped in and linked in before it comes popped up to the Faculty of Grad Studies. So we have this document, and a link to this will be provided in the chat by the end of this webinar, so that you have this 2-pager as well that involves that infographic on the front, but a little bit more detail in terms of who does what. So you're not alone. Sometimes it's scary to think about, do I see my supervisor? And this funny PhD comic on the left is just to get at that. A lot of us are sort of nervous. Do I even want to bother them? No, they're so busy. You know, I should try and do this on my own. I'm a grad student after all. Nuh-uh. Your supervisor is your mentor, your coach, your guide, your teacher, and your listener, and your reviewer and your make sure you got it right person. So we really do ask that you don't attempt this on your own, that you work in partnership. And so if I have my colleague here from the Office of Research Ethics, Alison Marakis-Collins, I will turn to you.
All right. So thank you for that. Hi, I'm Alison. I'm the director of the Office of Research Ethics, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this very important webinar. I really appreciate the opportunity. As Cheryl was indicating, York has signed an MOU with the tri-agency, basically ensuring that all of our research involving humans, but also animals and biological agents, adheres to the relevant legislation. So when it speaks to humans, it's the TCPS and our Senate policy. And as part of that process, and to ensure that student researchers are aware of their responsibilities as it speaks to doing research with humans, all graduate students and undergrads actually must complete the TCPS tutorial. It's an online tutorial, and append it to their protocol form in order to proceed with the ethics review process. I will say, I've heard from some students that it can take 3 hours, it can take 6 hours. So it depends, but I would, if you have not already done so and completed the tutorial, I would suggest that you do so soon and or build it into your work plan. Thank you. So these are just some of the ethics guidelines, as I said, that speak to humans, animals, and biological agents. They're just the top line ones, but certainly for animals and biological agents, the list is very, very long, but these are just the top ones. For animals, we are required to have a certificate of good animal practice and to be licensed with OMAFRA. And for research involving biological agents, at York, we are a level 2+ containment facility. As I said, we're required to be compliant with the relevant guidelines, PHAC, CFIA, and many other. Okay. So this is a question we get a lot. So why is ethics review necessary? And I think I try to drill it down to 3 main points. The first is to conduct in research so that you conduct your research in a responsible manner and recognizing that your research participants have rights and you as a researcher have responsibilities. It's also there to protect your research subjects if it's life science research and your research participants if it's non-life science research. And also, ethics review is necessary to protect you as a researcher. It allows you to publish, for example, and also in the event that someone questions your research practices, by having a valid ethics protocol that you have adhered to, then claims of research misconduct, et cetera, can be better addressed. So when is ethics review required? So again, I get this question a lot as well. Chances are, if your research involves humans in some way, it is probably subject to review. Obviously, research with animals and biological agents are always subject to review, but it includes research that is, so for faculty members or students, research that's funded or not, research that's undertaken off-site. Oh, someone's trying to reach research me. Oh, sorry, when I got booted out, I had a bunch of people looking into getting me back on, so I apologize. So research that's undertaken off campus. So what I mean here is sometimes your research is going to be undertaken in a school, for example, or in a hospital, or in another country. So chances are you may also have to get ethics approval through these other institutions, but at a minimum, you must get ethics review and approval through the relevant ethics board at York. Okay, so as you've seen at the bottom, I put with some exceptions. So we're going to start with the one that is required. Sorry, moving forward. The next slide. Yes. So most of these are self-evident. You're interacting with a human in some way. Chances are it's subject to review. I do want to stress that even research that's conducted on yourself, so autoethnography, reflective practice, some in the life sciences where you test things out on yourselves. I know when I was an undergrad, I took my own blood and I used my own skin cells for research. That would be subject to review. Okay, so If you are the only participant in the research, chances are it may still be subject to review. So my advice would always be reach out to my office. Say, Allison, I'm not sure if this is subject to review. Myself or my staff will likely meet with you, discuss your research, and provide advice. Okay? What I want you to take away from today is always, when in doubt, always ask. We are more than happy to help you. We have weekly office hours where we just answer questions from anybody who has a question. If you want specific help, just send us an email at the ore@yorku.ca and we will meet with you and have a consultation session. Okay? Data security. This is absolutely critical. You know, unfortunately, certainly in the post-pandemic world, there's an awful a lot of concerns with its where it speaks to the safety and security of data. So you as a researcher are required to ensure the safeguarding or the security of your data throughout its full life cycle. From collection, use, dissemination, retention, and disposal. So that means your full life cycle. So I think if you think about it this way, what is the risk to your research participants if someone who shouldn't have access to your data accesses it? So when thinking about designing your research project, who you're going to reach out to, who your participants will be, what you're going to ask them, how you're going to collect the data. Think about when you're storing this data, when you're transmitting this data, when you're using this data, what is the risk to your participants if someone who shouldn't see it accesses it? Okay. We have lots of guidelines and we're constantly adding to them on our website. Some of them are currently under review. For example, our Indigenous research ethics guidelines are under review. If you can't find something or you think something warrants a guideline, please reach out to us and we'd be more than happy to draft one to answer your questions. Our website is under construction again to make it more navigable, if that is a word. So if you have any feedback for us on how we can improve it, we're always happy to hear it. So these are some of the processes we're going to talk about just very quickly. Moving forward. Oh, okay. So just very quickly, I think Cheryl's going to talk about the review process, so my apologies. And renewals and amendments. When you get ethics approval, your research is subject to renewal. If you go beyond 1 year, you will not be reminded. So please, when you get your certificate of approval, just put the end date in your calendar to remind yourself that you need to renew it. Similarly with amendments, if you get out into the field and think, you know what I've got approved isn't necessarily working or could be improved, then just submit an amendment application. It generally takes 5 to 7 business days. And unless, of course, the committee feels it's a significant change. What I want to stress here, though, is please don't proceed with any change to your research unless and until you've received ethics approval to do so. Similarly, if there is an incident, such as an unanticipated or adverse event, please reach out to our office as soon as possible and or your supervisor so that we can better understand what has happened, what steps you've taken to address it, and what steps moving forward need to be undertaken to mitigate or prevent that from happening again. And at the end of your there is a form you can fill out when you're done your research. It's called an end of project form. That just formally notifies us that you're not going to need to renew it anymore. As we said, I believe Cheryl said at the outset, one of the key things I just want you to take away from the ethics process is that you really should not undertake any research activities with humans or animals or biological agents until you have the relevant ethics approval in place. Okay? It represents research misconduct to proceed without it. At a minimum, the best you can hope for is that you will not be able to use the data that you have collected to date. Okay, so please do not. Generally, the committee's comments you will receive on your protocols or it's approved or with minor changes. Sometimes, though, the committee will be asking for major revisions to your ethics protocol, usually your consent form or the recruitment methodology. when you get a letter from the ethics committee, if there's there's a lot there, or you're not entirely clear about what they're asking, please, please, please always reach out to our office, and we will have a sit down by virtual sit down with you and go through the letter with you so that you can better understand. We want to avoid the situation where you're going through multiple revisions. We don't want it to take months for you. Okay. Again, approvals are granted for multiple years and they're subject to annual renewals. And you have to renew your protocol if your research is ongoing. Okay. Nowadays, everything obviously is via email. There are very limited situations where hard copies are required with a wet signature. If that is the case, please reach out and we will provide that for you. Okay. Okay. Ethics protocol preparation. My staff are actually happy to help you with this. If you want us to look at your draft protocol, for example, we're more than happy to review it and give you tips on how to improve it or areas that we think might be a problem. Make sure your protocol is complete. Attach everything that is relevant. So if you're handing out flyers, for example, attach the draft flyer. If you're going to be recruiting on Facebook, let us see the text that you intend to use to recruit, okay? Anything that's relevant to your protocol so that the committee can provide a thorough review. When you have, as I just said, if you have, make sure that your questions are concise. 6 or 7 pages on describing your research project is problematic. And also don't refer to documents that are appended to it. Please make sure that you answer the questions concisely. Yeah, that's a good point here. Sorry, I didn't see this. We don't review proposals. So just because the information is in your proposal, we will not have seen it. We only review the ethics protocol. And if your research requires external permission, say, for example, you're doing research with in a school board or with in a school, you're going to need to append the relevant permissions or approval. Without that, you can be granted conditional approval, but full approval will not be granted until the permissions or approvals are in place.
I think what's really important there too is for students to know, say you know someone at a school, that's not considered an in. You still need to get permission from the organization. So be real careful with that. A lot of you have lots of sort of relationships with community organizations, etc. You need their approval and they need to go up their respective pipe to get approval for you to walk in there and do interviews, for example.
Exactly.
Here you go.
Yes, recruitment. This is one of the ones that we often see expand a bit, saying one word, snowball, is not enough information for us to understand how you intend to recruit people. So just, give us a little bit more information. And as I said, please append, any recruitment materials you intend to use. A really good point here about inducements. So what are you offering? How will it be provided? And again, you can't tie completion to compensation, right? So, sorry, compensation to completion. So if you're offering, $50 for your participants, you can't then say in your consent form, you're only going to get it, the $50, if you complete the study, right? You have a right to withdraw without penalty. And be specific. What are you asking the participants to do? Where do you intend to do it? Participants have to be fully informed of the nature of the research. Yes, there can be deception, and that's a topic for another day. But in general, yeah, that requires a little bit more. But in the most general sense, they must be fully informed on the consent form as to what they are actually agreeing to participate in. Yes, risk. So list all the potential risks, and that's obviously the known risks, right? You're not going to know everything, but the known risks, or what you should reasonably know would be the risks, and how are you going to mitigate those risks? So if the risk is that, there may be adverse impacts for your participants if people knew that they were participating. Okay, so what steps are you taking to make sure or to limit the possibility that their identity would be known? Okay, things like that. And always, if there are like psychological risks, emotional risks, these kinds of things, you must provide a list of support services or resources that will be made available to your participants. Just the last thing. Oh yes, the consent form. It's advisable. Please use the template. It makes it easier for you, and it ensures that you're including all the relevant information. And that's good that separate consent forms for each activity. So if you're doing a survey and you're doing focus groups, for example, there will be slightly different information in both. So different consent forms will be required. Assent forms are required for participants that are under the age of consent for the purposes of research, which at York we've set at 16 for minimal risk research and 18 for more than minimal risk research. So if your participants are under the age of 16, then you require guardian or parental consent and assent, and both must agree in order for the research to proceed. So if only the parent or guardian says, yes, I agree to let my child participate, but the child says, I don't want to do it, then it cannot proceed. Okay, that's the purpose of an assent form. And again, just a reminder, any change to your protocol, including you're no longer going to do something such as I'm not going to issue the survey, or I'm not going to do the focus group part of it. That is an amendment, and you need to get that reviewed and approved. What's in our office, as per your protocol, must be what you're actually doing. Okay?
I think too, we're going to take some questions live in a moment, just from my colleagues that are helping in the background. But I wanted to say one of the things that the associate deans in grad studies see is that sort of vague language around what you're telling your potential participants you're going to talk to them about. What we want to avoid is that you say, I'm going to generally talk to you about your experience in grade 6. But then later on, you go in there and you're asking them about very triggering things. They weren't prepared, they hadn't consented to it. And so you'll see sometimes feedback that come from us on the memorandum that are asking you to be a little more explicit so that your participants have what we call informed consent. They know what they're walking into. They know the kind of content that you're going to want to be asking about, and that clearly they know that they can say, that's off the table. I don't want to do that. So we have some questions. Are they going to be read to us a little bit?
Hi, Cheryl. Yeah, they will. And I'll start with the first one. All right, so here's a question. Hello, I'm a second-year PhD student involved in a research project with my colleague and a faculty member. I was instructed to complete HPRC protocol form for ethics application, but I'm confused if I should also complete the TD1 and the TD2 form. This project is not for my thesis or dissertation. It is a project that we wish to move forward. Thank you.
So if the research that sounds like joint research, so that would be considered faculty-led research. So yes, the appropriate form is the HPRC protocol form. That is joint research with a faculty member.
Yeah, so it won't be the TD1 or the TD2.
No.
Thanks, Anessa. Next question.
All right. The next one. How can we approach adding our research in an orthoethnographic thesis when it has already taken place over the past years?
I don't think I understand the question. Are you asking like your lived experience as informs your research?
I'm going to let them clarify that, and I'll move on to the next one.
Okay.
And for those that have their hands raised, just to let you know, please use the Q&A function. We will absolutely get to your questions live. So the next question is, what aspects of the Indigenous Protocol Ethics Review is under review?
Oh, all of it. Because we have a new Indigenous Research Ethics Board, which was approved by Senate. So it'll be Indigenous focused and Indigenous led protocol form, consent documents, etc. They're currently in the process of operationalizing the Senate policy. The committee will be up and running within the next few weeks.
All right. Here's another question. Should I apply for ethics approval once my experiments are funded, or can I start without funding and add it later?
Yeah, you don't require funding to pursue your inquiry. So that's not linked. I think if you want to start doing your work, you want to get a proposal in place and approved by your supervisory committee and then pursue ethics. So they're not tied. Next question.
All right. Is there a relationship between the REB process and York International? So, for example, safety abroad. According to REB, would I be allowed to conduct research in a country with a travel advisory?
It's an excellent question. I would advise that actually Cheryl would be better able to answer that. From a research ethics perspective, our purview is limited to risks to the participants, not any risks to the researcher. So only if the risk to the researcher had an impact on the participants, then we would be able to speak to it. But Cheryl.
Yeah, when there's travel advisories, this is why that risk assessment box that we sometimes find people to just sort of click and go is so important that you have that conversation. And it often is an individual conversation between the program, the student researcher, and FGS to make a determination around protecting you. So maybe we'll take another question or two, and we'll do the rest of the slides, and then we can return to the questions. So maybe a couple more, Ness.
Sounds good. We've got a lot coming in, so I'll go to the next one. What happens if the proposed participants I aim to use does not want to participate after the ethics gets approved?
Then you would have to either regroup and rethink again what is behind participant reluctance. And we want to honor that reluctance. There can't be any coercion in any way. Obviously, you all know that as students, but it would probably mean a regroup, a sort of a timely meeting with your supervisor to say, I've been out in the field, I can't get anyone, I'm trying, nobody really wants to talk to me. And then what it might require is either an amendment, and if it's a substantial amendment, and so be it. Just treat these as, try something, all the who, what, where, when, why, get out in the field, see how it's going, have a meeting with your team, and then see, do I need to make a change here? It's okay. Next question. That was a great question.
All right, I'll do one more before we return to you. What is the consent form that is required if trying to recruit people through social media / snowball sampling approach? Individual interviews sort of thing?
If you mean like that they can't physically sign it, you can use the checkbox agreement box that you can like we have on surveys and online environments. I think I answered your question.
Yeah, I think too what our student here is trying to get at is what's the diff between the actual consent and the recruitment strategy. So we want to see, like, if you're trying to recruit on social media, say, hey, I want to talk to so-and-so about such and such. We want to see that recruitment poster.
Yes.
And the text. So that's different. Then when you get a nibble, and then the nibble says, reaches out to you and say, I'm kind of interested. Can you tell me more? You would tell them a little bit more. Then you would send the official consent form, which inside it tells them everything you're asking them to do, what you're going to be asking them to talk about, and what their rights are. So they're sort of separate.
Yeah.
And I just need your guidance. Do you think we should continue on with questions, or
We've got a few, but we do have someone on our team also responding to some of them. So why not go ahead with the discussion and we can return to questions after.
Yeah. Okay, we'll do that. So I'm going to take over now, Allison. We'll return back to both of us. Yeah, it's okay, in responding to more of the questions. So what we know from reviewing protocols at the Faculty of Grad Studies before we punt it up to the Office of Research Ethics, that there's really some key areas to attend to. And why I'm telling you this is because we're trying to avoid sort of more back and forth or delays. We sort of want you to have it done tidily before it goes forward. So do you have external permissions? And I can't caution enough, even though this might add to the length of time it takes to get ethics, you better get external permissions. At a school board, a hospital, a community agency, whatever it is, find out, ask the questions, and make sure your supervisor is aware of those conversations that you're having. You want to be sure that there's congruence between the proposal and the ethics form. We'll often see an ethics form that says, nope, no human participants. And then in the proposal, which research ethics doesn't review, but your associate deans and grad studies do, we see you're going to be talking to people who are Blue Jay fans. And so they're not congruent, right? So you need to make sure that what you say over in the ethics forms is what you've said in the proposal. So remember, I said do the proposal first, and then fold all that cool information into your ethics forms. Make sure your methodology is agreed upon by your committee. Sometimes we'll see a student has checked off 5 or 6 methodologies, ethnography and interviews and focus groups and this, that, and the other, and we're like, ah. And so it always means to me that maybe you could use a little bit more wrapping around what the different methods are and which one is the best for your approach. Make sure you have identified how you're going to analyze the data. There are specific methods in data analysis. If you're fuzzy and it's been a while since your research course, again, this is the role of your supervisory committee to help you. Make sure your recruitment strategies and the questions you'll ask are indicated. Consent forms must adhere to the templates, and they're meant to protect you for sure and protect your research participants. And another key area to attend to is that your supervisor has helped you with this. They've signed off on it and your committee's in agreement. Okay, there's 3 minds supposed to wrap around you as you do this work. Take it step by step and do it alongside with your proposal. So we're going to go to questions. This is just our closing slide, Allison. So we're flagging this very cool development of virtual office hours every single Wednesday. With a meeting link. I think this has gone out to every single grad program director, grad program assistant. It's gone out in FGS News. It's also on the ORE webpage that there's every Wednesday you can drop in between 12 and 1 virtually. So let's go back to questions.
All right, let's go to the next one. Okay, what is meant by separate consent forms for each activity?
Okay.
Well, is it okay, Allison? Sometimes you should have a consent form that says, I agree to participate in a focus group. Or I agree to be interviewed one-to-one. And sometimes sometimes you can fold them into the same consent form. But I think because it's 2 different methods of data collection, we like to see the consent forms different because you might be asking them to do something different in a focus group. One of my own students first interviewed a bunch of nurses and then said at the end of each of those interviews, I'm going to have a focus group too, if any of you want to come on over and participate. And so what they talked about in that focus group was different than what they talked about in the one-to-one interview. So it depends on what you're doing in each. And again, that's a conversation with your supervisor. I sort of like, as a supervisor, like to keep things clean and allow folks to make an informed decision. Yeah, I can do that one-to-one, or I'm not so sure about the focus group. Ask me later. Next question. These are terrific.
All right. Can you explain on informed consent 10A on the TD2 form?
I think I'd have to pull that up. Now I'm screen sharing, so I'm going to ask someone else to do that. Let's circle back to this one. We'll get Allison to pull it up on her computer. Let's go to the next question and then circle us back to it.
Sure. Thank you for the presentation. Do the questions in the draft questionnaire submitted for ethics review have to appear in exactly the same format in the final study? For example, could a question be rephrased or a construct refined for clarity, or would you have to submit for re-review?
Yeah, if it stays with the original intent, then it's fine. Mostly what we're looking for is that we're not asking questions of participants that can be harmful. So long time ago, I had a student want to ask participants, is it hard to be gay? And yes, and I know where it came, it's a long time ago, but I know where that came from that this was an empathetic person who wanted to understand trauma and understand homophobia, etc. But the kind of question was just full of maybe assumption and maybe a bit of heterosexism. And so we look at the questions in order to see if there's unintentional harms. Once they're approved, if there's just a tiny rephrasing, just ask your supervisor, is this all right? Am I staying within sort of the same approach, or have I taken it in a direction that could be harmful? So this is a fantastic question, and it tells me that you're all being reflexive around wanting to be safe and careful around how you're involving participants. It's great. Okay, Alison, did you happen to get that informed consent box up, number 10?
Yeah. I believe the question was to clarify question 10A on the Yeah. So it says, is there a relationship between participants and either of the following? The principal investigator, yes. And the person obtaining consent. So you yourself, or someone who's working on the project, and the participant. So basically what you're trying to do there is to make sure that there's no conflict of interest or coercion, right? Like if you're doing research and, your little brother is participating in the study. So clearly, you're administering the consent form. It could be argued that that is like a bit coercive, right? So,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's best to be out about it. Like, I want to interview all my best friends. And so, it's not that you wouldn't be allowed to interview all your best friends, but it's how you're going to navigate. And you'll often see on a memo that goes back to you, can you tell us how you're going to mitigate any unintentional coercion sort of thing? So you can have sort of, know them. A lot of times research will say, I'm in a theater, I'm a theater major, and I've met people over the last 15 years. I'm going to sort of recruit through my contacts. So they don't have to be complete strangers to you, but when they get closer or closer or closer, it's about how we're going to mitigate sort of that pressuring, can you participate in my study sort of thing. We want to be careful about that. Next question.
All right. I believe this is a follow-up to the question we were trying to clarify. My research has been autoethnographic. It has already taken place as it was the basis of my MRP. If our personal research is needing review, how can this be done?
So is this, Alison, that the person is wanting to use data from an MRP, which I would imagine had ethics approval at the program level, whether they're allowed to lift it and use it and place it into their doctorate? How would you answer that?
If that is the question, then I think as long as ethics approval, contemplated that, so you've made in your original protocol form about your autoethnographic research that you intended to use the data for, your PhDs. You got it for your master's and now you want to use it for your PhD. I think you're correct. But if this is further autoethnographic research, then further review may be required. It's really difficult to answer this question without seeing what you're being, like the specifics of your situation, because autoethnographic research is, not as straightforward to answer. We do have 2 sets of guidelines available on our website if you'd like to review those. Or you can reach out to us and we can help you with your specific question.
Yeah, I think this one really deserves you to drop into the office hours. Let's just be sure. And if it ends up that you have to say, make a little amendment or a little tiny application, it's not going to be large, that I want to use this data over here, even though it's yours, right? This is data about self. It might require sort of a little bit of an ask. I don't think it's going to be a big ask.
We're happy.
Yeah, that drop-in is going to be essential. Are there more questions?
Yeah, we've got about 6 more with 10 minutes. So let me get to the next one. All right. So under what specific circumstances could there be limitations as to protecting confidentiality of participants when there is a duty to report?
So I mean, Cheryl, you have much more experience with this, but from an ethics perspective, you would need to include that in your consent form. And if you are, I'll let Cheryl, because that's your area of expertise, but in your protocol form, if you are part of a discipline that has a duty to report, you would need to include that in your consent form. Cheryl, sorry.
Yeah, no, I think I sound like a Canadian there. Yeah, no. I think that sometimes when we're partnering with youth to tap their wisdom and to learn stuff, we're not mining for that data, but there's a disclosure. It's really helpful to make sure that in the consent form that it indicates this, that if there's additional information or I find that you might be at risk, I need to take steps. Sometimes though, for all of you listening, and remember, don't go mining for it, don't go asking for it. But if you discover that somebody is at risk of harming themselves or others, I think that's worth an urgent call to your supervisor, who can then urgently get a hold of Allison. And we can then determine what is in the best interest of that person, right? Above all else, research ethics is trying to protect participants. Faculty of Grad Studies is trying to capacity build you and protect you as students, as learning sort of students of research. So I hope that answers that one.
All right. Here's the next one. It's a two-part. If I am interviewing individuals from a 2S LGBTQA plus community, is it okay if my participants know I am also part of the community?
No problem there. As long as and you learn this in research courses, right? As long as you then don't sort of add all about yourself in the interview kind of thing. So then it becomes sort of the Cheryl show, and Cheryl's telling all about her lived experience. So yeah, totally cool. And a lot of us will do research with folks who have a shared lived experience. That's all right. And sometimes them knowing that makes the research climate feel a tad safer. Good question.
Okay. And the second question was, do you require to see permission from an organization to post my study recruitment advertisement?
No. If let's say the 519 says, yeah, you can put, I might have this wrong, Allison. The 519 says, sure, you can put a poster up. I think that's different than asking the 519 to work with you to recruit or to meet with them. But Allison, you might have additional.
It depends. It really depends, right? So say you wanted to do research and you want to recruit from like a particular like walk-in clinic, you need approval. You can't just post it up on the board, right? Some spaces you do need permission to post, some places you don't. At York, you can't just put up flyers. You need approval. So I guess
Okay.
I hate to say this, but it depends.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I think, yeah, I was thinking approval in terms of like more of a formal approval. Yes, you can do this research involving the 519, but you're saying
Permission.
if you want to hang something at the
Right.
519 or wherever, you better get their approval. Don't just go rogue on a Sunday afternoon, no one's around, and hang it.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, good.
You're right to the distinction between the words, not necessarily approval, because you already have ethics approval. It's permission to post. It's different. Yes.
Got it. That's good. Yeah.
All right, let's see if we can get maybe 2 to 3 more in. Can we use our own social media platforms to recruit participants? Example, recruiting transgender individuals in research already has a large community, friend following. Is that allowed?
Again, it depends. You'd have to be crystal clear to the folks who are in your personal network that you're now wearing the hat of a researcher, and what you intend to do. So I'd have to see what you're doing. I'm not saying no at all, but it would need to be crystal clear that you're now wearing the hat of a researcher and not just their personal, having a personal relationship.
Yeah. It's always about navigating. Is there any chance that there's undue pressure that I'm not even aware of? Like if you're, say, a supervisor and some of your staff follow you on social media, which I don't think is a good idea, but anyway, and you put out this sort of recruitment poster, are they going to feel they better do that or you'll be ticked? So it's thinking through, is there any unintended pressure or that I'm not aware of? I like to keep things clean. I have one student who created a different Instagram account to recruit girls and young women and female identified youth for a study and didn't do it through her own social media. I have another student who recruited other critical care trauma nurses through her social media, but a bunch of other avenues. And we talked about navigating that. So always good to talk it through.
All right. Here's another question. Beyond a responsible approach towards research participants, would methodology, is the research conducted in a manner that is sound from an empirical research perspective? Okay. Would methodology part of the mandate, would methodology be a part of the mandate of this governance? For example, cherry picking results or excluding people of certain demographics, such
Really good.
as age.
Yeah. So that doesn't come to research ethics, but it's about rigor. So now we're broaching over in terms of, in your proposal, you need to be able to write about how are you going to attend to rigor, not cherry picking, not excluding, or being clear on a rationale behind who am I recruiting, who am I not, and why. Remember that word why, such a big word, why. It's all about rationale. And that's sort of the rigor checks that you have with a strong supervisor, that you're talking about your work in the field, you're talking about analysis, they see your data as well, and talking through how you're landing on things to make sure you're not cherry picking. But at the phase of ORE approval and proposal approval, we wouldn't know that yet. So we're not really sort of looking at that. For my own proposals, I do like to see a little bit about rigor. How are you going to attend to rigor and transparency and stuff? So next question.
Okay, two more. What constitutes permission from Indigenous individuals and communities for the ethics review?
Again, that's a very complex question. It's not about permission. The research, for example, the communities within which you want to do your research would need to approve of it. There's multiple levels of consent and approval. The community itself, First Nations, for example, would often have their own research ethics board. They would need to review and approve your research, and then individuals involved in your research would need to consent. So it's a multi-step process.
Mm-hmm. And a layer at York. So don't be afraid of it.
No.
It's really very enriching to see the degree of autonomy and self-determination that's coming forward in amending sort of Indigenous research protocols, making sure that Indigenous communities' rights to self-sovereignty is protected. And it's part of York's commitment to decolonization. So don't be afraid to do that work. Is it a few extra layers? Oh, well, that's okay. That's part of the learning. I think that's another cool opportunity in this milestone, that you then learn more about sovereignty rights and what consent looks like, what data ownership looks like when partnering with Indigenous communities.
All right, we have one more question. Is it possible to check no for any potential conflict of interest? I'm working on the state's institutionalization of Buddhist monastics in 1960s, so I cannot see any potential conflict of interest.
Yes, of course, the COI box can be clicked no. In fact, we often do see it, and I'll often, and the other associate dean might sort of read a little more, go, you sure? And try and sort of read through the lines and make sure. So oftentimes there's no COI. And I think there's a little line you can even write down and say, this is what I'm thinking about. But that's another discussion point with your supervisor. I think the thing that worries me as we move to close is we all just don't want grad students doing this on your own. Doesn't mean you don't have the smarts or the intellect to do it. It's why would you? This is new or newish. There's a whole group of us wanting to wrap around you. So why not tap us and ask these questions? So should you have any questions about research ethics, you can contact first and always your supervisor, ensuring that you're working on this together. And your GPD around anything programmatic or disciplinary. What are sort of the parameters or expectations within your own program? Your grad program assistant, so you understand the process of submission. Sometimes grad students submit to the ORE, and there's a process of doing it through your program. And then within the Office of Research Ethics, you can contact Wendy or Nadia, and of course you can always contact Allison, and the best email is ore@yorku.ca. But then we also have these drop-in hours on Wednesdays from 12 to 1. So with that, I'm going to take this opportunity to really thank Allison. I know you had a busy morning. The university taps you all the time in terms of your expertise around research ethics. I want to thank the team behind this Scholarly Skills series for grad students, working to make sure that we bring you something that's digestible, that you can have during lunch. Hopefully you had lunch during this time, and that you know that this isn't the end, that you can reach out to us and ask more questions. So thanks everybody for attending, and we hope to see you at the next one.